Hello and welcome to another episode of Qumulex Radio. I am Josh. This is my friend Aaron, and we're going to have a debate today. So hopefully we will continue to be friends when it is over. The topic that we're going to talk about today is Wiegand format in access control. We like to keep things kind of nice and friendly and easy breezy here on the podcast. So today, Jerkface Aaron is going to tell me why he and his access control friends think that Wiegand is so horrible. Why every day I go onto social and I see Wiegand being, pulled into an alley and beaten mercilessly with no help or support from anyone. And I got some things to say about that. But, Aaron is very knowledgeable. Aaron does know more about access control than I do. I am armed with my friends, Dunning and Kruger. So I will not let my lack of knowledge stop me from making my point. So Aaron, please tell us all what all the smart people dislike about Wiegand.
So yeah, with Wiegand infrastructure, there are a couple of limitations. So first off, I mean, if we want to kind of start off at the ground, it would be the cabling limitations. So, in comparison to OSDP, that's a 485 bus protocol, so you can essentially get those runs up to 4,000 feet. Different manufacturers suggest different things, but with Wiegand and that technology, I should say, you're constrained to distances. So for example, like with a 22 gauge wire, it might only be 250 feet. With 18 gauge, let's say 500 feet. So that could be pretty significant when you're talking about different applications like warehouses and possibly even schools, where you have essentially run cables to tell data rooms where these panels will be located. There's a bunch of different arguments, and then the other caveat, I guess, to Wiegand is its security. It's kind of that technology goes back to the days where nothing was encrypted. You can see the data that's going across those lines in plain text. So it presents some vulnerabilities, but I mean, I'm not saying that it can't be used. We started with this call where I'm kind of on a middle ground. I don't believe that it's the most terrible thing in the world, but you definitely have to be taking a layered security approach. So
Okay, so you're attempting a nuanced approach with me.
Yes.
Which is no fair, because I was counting on you not. Do you feel that the numerous videos that we see on social media talking about Wiegand, are they very nuanced?
So no, I mean,
No.
they're very biased. They it's almost like a sales pitch, if you will. Why OSDP is so much better, and
if I'm an integrator or an end user and I watch videos about Wiegand, and usually there's some guy sitting in a controlled environment with equipment showing me how it can be cloned. I mean, do you feel comfortable with what you're hearing? I mean, I almost feel like how do I want to word this? Almost like I'm being told to be ashamed. I should feel ashamed
that you're presenting this technology. Yeah, right. I would say, hey, if
you put in Wiegand, and what is wrong with you? And shame on you. And like in Game of Thrones, which walks through with the bell, shame. That's what I feel I'm hearing.
Sure. I mean, so there's several factors to really examine here. So when you're presenting a proposal to a customer, they might not have the budget to rip and replace readers. Or maybe they're so ingrained into 125K credentials that it would be very costly for them in that moment to advance their infrastructure. So that's okay. That's one argument. That's honestly why it still exists and why it's prevalent is availability, cost. It's very low. It's very available. But the other kind of spectrum to this argument is, if it's your only approach to security, then yes, I would say it has a lot of lot of negative attributes. But if you have a layered security approach, meaning you're using cameras in addition to this access control technology, in addition to an intrusion detection system, I would say it would be very hard, for somebody to defeat your system. Again, that's where the layers come into play. I would say where a use case it's pretty vulnerable would be like an insider threat type scenario where maybe you have a malicious coworker that's cloning credentials. It's pretty common practice for end users to purchase their credentials in a series. So if I know that my card is 125, for example, or number 125, and I'm able to use a reader to determine, what the site code and what the card numbers are, then I could, deduce that, hey, I could either go up or down in that series, and I'm going to mimic my coworker's card. This is pretty common knowledge. It's pretty well documented. I don't think I'm, putting exploits out there in the world. So from that perspective, yes, it's insider threats. Those kind of threat actors it's definitely a problem. But from somebody who's coming off the streets, I think it's kind of a laughable argument. Like, yeah, they're gonna pull my reader down off the wall, from my loading dock, for example, like an external, area of the building where I'm gonna pull the reader off. I'm gonna install some kind of sniffing device. I'm gonna, extract this data. I think that's pretty far fetched. I think that also using like a dolphin type scanner, to gain access into somebody's space. Again, I think it's pretty far fetched. Not that it couldn't happen, anywhere that's I've been in my integration days where it's worth breaking into. They absolutely had a layered approach. They had cameras. They had an active, monitoring, like command center or SOC, and they had patrolling guards. So, you had these multiple layers you have to get through, and it almost ends up being like, mission impossible in many senses. You have to defeat all these layers to be successful. And, it's not just as simple as roaming the hallways in a construction vest and you think you're going to get everywhere. I can't remember where that reference came from, but yeah, I remember hearing something like, oh, you could get through any building or in most spaces just wearing a construction vest, and nobody's going to question you. I think it's far-fetched that you're going to get challenged by every employee, but that's where guards come into play. It's their job.
Well, as someone who used to do outside plant construction and had strobe lights in his Explorer, I can't tell you that I pretty much could go anywhere I wanted with strobes and a vest.
Right. I mean, hey,
there's something to that, but
yeah.
In the world of Norse mythology, Thor's brother is Loki, who is ambiguous and no one knows what side he's on. So I don't know what you just said to me. Like, you made some of my points and you also made some of the other. So this is we're really failing at arguing as usual.
Yeah,
I guess that's good. My perspective from a lower level of IQ than yours is this. I see a lot of shaming. I don't see a lot of nuance or gray area. It is Wiegand is bad and what is wrong with you. I think that I think you started to get into what my feeling always is, where first of all, whether you have a consultant or not, if you're an integrator and you show up and you're going to do a quote, even if it's like front door, back door, and one camera, there are some questions you're asking and you're trying to understand why are they making this request. You're consulting with them. And so you're kind of doing a needs assessment. You're trying to understand what their threat level is, what the risk tolerance is, even if you're not using big words like that. And let's be real. I mean, there are facilities that need a higher level of security. And I actually would agree with what I hear out there, which is if there is a legitimate threat that someone actually might want to, I don't know, take a machine and clone the card to gain access to vulnerable people or valuable assets, yeah, that's a concern. Tony's flower shop isn't going to experience that. Larry's, CPA office isn't likely to experience that. And that's a level of effort that's unnecessary. And quite frankly, that they'd have an easier time just throwing a brick through the window.
Yeah.
So I think it just feels a little off to me to just, and here's my issue, is because there are places where I think Wiegand makes a ton of sense. And, let's talk about how many businesses just in the US alone that are like small, medium-sized businesses don't have any type of electronic access control at all. It's 185,000. That's false. I just totally made that up. I don't know. I don't know how
Like, oh,
many,
wow.
but it's a bunch, right? There's
Right.
definitely a lot. And so, you got two things going on here. You're shaming, in my view, without nuance. And so it's a lower cost solution, but compared to what? Well, compared to, like a traditional physical key approach, that is a nightmare. And so just imagine, you're Larry's CPA shop, and you've kind of grown, and during tax season you run multiple schedules, and you need other people who maybe aren't the partners to have a physical key. Talk about cloning. I can go to Lowe's or Home Depot and I don't have to talk to anybody to copy a key now. Like that robot just says put a key inside. He's not checking anybody's ID or anything. So I feel like the worst thing you could do as a business is be relying on just a physical key. However, for that business, their drivers may be, more control over a schedule, having a lock and unlock schedule that they can configure. The fact that they can revoke credentials, whether or not the person gives the thing back. And in the case of cloning a Wiegand card, I'm sorry, but when I disable the primary card, the clone's dead too. Neither of them work. So that is still way better than a physical key. I can run reports if I wanted to in my records rooms or other areas. I could even have an additional Wiegand reader because they're not that expensive. And I could even see when people go and when they leave in certain areas. So there's all these benefits that a smaller facility that isn't going to have a huge security budget, and their threat level is not midnight. As they would say on The Office, they are not a threat level midnight. They have basic needs. They're a brick through a window away from somebody coming inside. Nobody's coming inside to take a monitor because that's about all they have. It's mainly about a more efficient way to lock the doors and not having to deal with the nightmare and the expense of somebody quits or somebody gets terminated, and you have to change all the keys and the lock cylinders because you don't know if they made a copy or not. You have no idea. And it's just the whole idea of I have a minimal layer of security, which is you cannot just turn the knob and walk in. And then I have another layer of security of, I can run reports and really see when people are there. Even with a basic system, there's probably a lot of interoperability with video systems where, you could get a notch in the video for here's when somebody swiped in. Is that them or not? Even with just a very inexpensive Wiegand approach, that probably allows more businesses who would just do a key, to get into the benefits of some electronic access control. And I don't want integrators to feel shamed like they've done something wrong.
Right.
I think what is more wrong is I don't think that you should then take that into a military facility, not that they would accept it, or a school or a bank. There's definitely places where I think there's a credible threat where someone would try to get in through nefarious means. And Wiegand is probably not the best option for them, and that's okay. But I also think we don't need to shame everybody who's using it for, the basic user, because they're not worried about, nobody's going to bother with that in their scenario. It's not worth the time to bring the cloning machine around. Plus, it's going to look pretty funny when somebody's standing there doing those things, pulling the reader down or whatever they do. And I guess that's my main issue is just, it just feels like it's no nuance. This is always bad. This shouldn't exist. How dare you use it? And I think there's more gray area than that. I think there's a lot of places where it does make sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with some of your talking points. And, again, I mean, kind of just reiterating, if it's your only means of securing your establishment, I might be worried, but, again, what our biggest kind of, we here at Qumulex, we pride ourselves on being a unified solution. So it's video and access control. Now that in itself is a very proactive approach to security. I'm sorry, reactive approach to security, because it's like you're forensically then going back after the fact to look at things and going back to budgetary requirements. The more proactive you want to be, the more costly it could be. Now it could be just as simple as, I'm not saying it's $1 million a year, but getting an intrusion detection system, getting established with the call center to, then when alarms go off, you're getting proactive calls, police are getting dispatched to your location. And then taking that a step further, it would be, like active monitoring, having a guard, for example, touring a facility, again, even more layered approach where you actually have physical barriers, that like gated parking lots and what have you that would have to be breached. So again, kind of going back to a layered security approach where if you see people in a certain area after hours, you immediately know something is happening. So yeah, I mean, to that point, every customer is a little bit different. Shouldn't be shamed into providing this technology to a end user. And again, I kind of feel like it's in many ways a sales pitch to promote a new technology or a new product.
Which is, I mean, it's good that there are better formats and better, more secure technologies available, and we should promote them. I just wish we could promote them in a way that doesn't, I would just hate to see like a whole class of end user just kind of be pushed out of electronic access control completely. Because we've convinced everybody that it's got to be like the best or nothing. And, if I'm Larry's CPA office, if I have a basic, intrusion detection alarm system, I have basic Wiegand access control, and I have a basic camera system, I'm probably in great shape. If I'm a branch office for the CIA, or a bank, that may not be the case, right?
Absolutely.
Mr. Cat making a cameo. Yeah, so not a very good argument.
No, it's even with some government directives that have been out for going on 19 years now, even the federal government with national security and what have you is still struggling to adopt these means and methods for secure credentialing. I mean, HSPD 12 has been around for a very long time now, and there are still agencies and organizations that are very slow to adopt and fully use the technologies that have been specified. So it's not every agency is doing PKI at the door and taking advantage of PIV credentials. Yeah, it's.
I think the main thing is, again, whether you are the consultant or whether you're an integrator servicing a smaller customer where there's no consultant involved, you're the consultant. I think it's taking the time to understand the customer's needs. Why are they requesting this? Why do they want to go from a physical key to electronic? Or there's always a reason. You didn't just wake up and it just happens. Something prompted you. Why is that? What is your risk? How much risk can you withstand? How concerned are you? What are all the factors? And it doesn't have to take that long to figure it out, but it's just understanding that customer. And my point is, and I'll get a lot of nasty comments for saying it, I think there are plenty of scenarios where when you evaluate all of that, you're going to come to the conclusion that, due to cost and complexity, the Wiegand approach makes perfect sense for that customer. And I think that should be okay. And we don't need to take Wiegand in a dark alley and beat it up every day. We just need to mention that if you're in a more secure or less risk tolerant type of an environment, hey, there's some other things here that you can do that are far more advanced and going to give you some advantages. And let's show the whole menu and let people choose what is best for them. Yeah, all right. So I tried to start a fight with Aaron, and still not had our first fight. I mean, it's going to come. We're going to find a way. I'll get you mad somehow.
It's your topics.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. And until next time, I'm Josh. This is Aaron, and we are Qumulex Radio.